access to education is extremely important. I think from there were certain times not so long ago where if you had a basic education, you could read or you could write, you could still be on your way and you can catch up. But these days things are moving so fast that you're almost getting light years behind. So if you're speaking about a system where people come out of it and through it and they can't really read well, they can't even write the very basic skills, it's tough to fix that. I mean, progress is in the small things, and this is one thing that is very, for me, very interesting about Romania. You feel that progress, and if I think back on the first time I came to Romania and today, how much has changed. It's just incredible, and I think maybe because I come from outside, and then you come from a different perspective. It's easier to see it and acknowledge it. It's like, we all tend to look in a very negative way at our own.
Yeah.
And always tend to believe, okay, the grass is greener on the other side. But Romania is a developing country. There's a lot of positives. And yeah, I think there's a lot to look forward to in Romania.
Hello, friends. As part of our podcast series today, we're going to have a very special conversation with Maggie Kitshoff. Maggie is a partner at Prime Kapital Development, a real estate development company, and she's leading the residential division. And Maggie and I are going to talk today about actually what brought us together, which are the communities we're building, right? And education as key themes. So a very warm welcome. Thank you for joining our series. And we're all looking forward to hear about the story, a little bit about the story of your life, you're passionate around education, and we're going to explore a few more topics together over the upcoming minutes.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. Thanks for
good to have you and to see you again. So, Maggie, we've been working on various projects for a couple of years now, and we're going to have the time to talk about that as well. But what I'd like us to start first with is a little bit about your story, your upbringing, because you come from very, very far away, and then a little bit about the education system there and some of the conclusions you have.
Yes, I am from South Africa, and during the time when I grew up, it was even further away because people didn't travel abroad. In fact, we said, and I know the British also say this, we always said you go overseas. And only when I was older did I realize it was a major deal. So I didn't grow up in a big city. I came from a town with about 36,000 people. Kind of place where everybody knew each other's business. We had a few primary schools there, and then one very big high school. So you would have different kids coming from different primary schools, and we all ended up in the same high school. I think I was very lucky because the first primary school I went to was extremely small. I think there was exactly 130 kids in the school, like one class or maybe two classes per year or grade. And I actually thought about it the other day, the value of being in a small contained environment where you can have some success as a young kid really made a difference. And then later I progressed. I went to a much larger school, also in primary school, with about 1,200 kids. That was like going overseas. And
different universe.
Yeah, and then I went into high school. Education was very different in those days. We had big classes, 35 kids, maybe 42 kids in a class. And I think, again, I was lucky because I didn't have big issues. I certain cognitive issues. I wasn't dyslexic. I don't think I had ADD or ADHD. But there were certainly kids with those kind of problems, and the education system didn't cater for anything specific. So I think as much as some of us came through the system, I think other kids struggled a lot. And I think one of the wonderful things today about education is that we look at kids very differently, more as individuals, and that's certainly not something that was part of my reality. Come from a biggish family, 3 brothers. I'm the youngest.
You have to
So
tell us how that was like growing up with 3 elder
I think
brothers.
it was eventful, but I also thought about that the other day. You know, growing up with 3 brothers, they never really treated me any differently, not as being younger or being a girl. And we were very competitive, right? So I had to play very physical sports with them. We played rugby a lot. Everything it always felt in our family was like Olympics. You know, it was always a competition. It was never just chilling. We were swimming, running. So I just always felt very frustrated because I didn't really make the connection that I was coming last because I was a girl and they were much bigger, faster, and older than me. So I think that made a big difference for me. One of the things that was also quite different is even though neither my mother or father went to university, for some reason it wasn't really the usual. It wasn't a usual thing for for people to go to university, right? So it was very specialist when I was young. But I never know. My mother somehow instilled this idea about education in all of us that I never thought of not going to university. I never thought of not leaving home. It was sort of just something that you were waiting for high school to tick over. Then you're going to leave. You're going to go on your own. You have to work hard enough to get into a university because not everyone's going to go. And then your career takes off from there. So from that perspective, I think I was very lucky. I don't know if it was by design or by default, but that's the environment that I grew up in, and yeah, it was pretty good.
Thank you for sharing your story. So, a couple of questions that come to mind. People hear different stories about South Africa. Some of us have never been there. Tell us a little bit about, how do you connect maybe in your natal country, but also perhaps in Romania, you'll tell us later on. How do you connect the well-being of a given country, the productivity and the future of a country to education based on your experience? What did you see in South Africa and maybe what do you see in Romania?
Well, yeah, I mean, South Africa is very particular, with quite, it's a big country. Let me start off with that. It's a beautiful country. Some of the things you may have heard about South Africa is not true. So I'll start on the most obvious place. There are no lions on the streets.
On the streets, yeah.
So it makes a big difference. And in South Africa, you often get this incidence of broken homes. Kids growing up sort of in more rural areas sometimes with the grandparents or a grandmother. A mother works in the city. A father may not even be known or involved at all. You also get incidents of kids just simply being on their own. And then they go into quite a broken school system with zero support back home. And it's clear that kind of to get through a system like that will almost be impossible to come out. You know, it's like there's often very great stories in South Africa about people who came through the system from these kind of backgrounds but there's always a person they connect that back to, you know, whether it's the Springbok rugby players in South Africa that came through a system. They would say there was a teacher that realized something or introduced them to the sport and then saw something in them that they wouldn't have been able to see in themselves. But for most people in a situation like that, they will fall through. So, you know, access to education is extremely, extremely important. I think there were certain times not so long ago where if you had a basic education, you could read or you could write, you know, you could still be on your way and you can catch up. But these days things are moving so fast that you're almost getting light years behind. So if you're speaking about a system where people come out of it and through it and they can't really read well, they can't even write the very basic skills, it's a it's tough to fix that somewhere down the line. So I don't think it's definitely not impossible, but it's very discouraging when that happens.
Thank you for that. It's a very interesting perspective, and I think the examples you indicated from South Africa, well, we hear similar stories in our communities over here, especially about kids who do not have the resources to be supported throughout the entire education program. So you've been traveling just before moving, as far as I can remember. Before moving to Romania, you were traveling a little bit
Yes.
between South Africa and Romania, and you've seen a little bit, the development of the country. Some of us Romanians, I remember from our last conversations, have a very negative opinion about the country and how it might have developed over time. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll come back, to the education part of it?
Yeah, I mean, for me, Romania is a wonderful country because there's always progress. I mean, every time, even if I go back away for 10 days and you come back, it's like something's changed. There's always, if you haven't been to a certain part of the city and then you're there a year later, there's more trees planted. The sidewalks look better. So, I mean, progress is in the small things. And this is one thing that is very, for me, very interesting about Romania. You feel that progress. And if I think back on the first time I came to Romania and today, how much has changed. It's just incredible. And I think maybe because I come from outside and then you come from a different perspective, it's easier to see it and acknowledge it. It's like, we all tend to look in a very negative way at our own, and always tend to believe, okay, the grass is greener on the other side. But Romania is a developing country. There's a lot of positives. And yeah, I think there's a lot to look forward to in Romania. It's a country that keeps on surprising me. I mean, it's a country that's very far removed from my own country in kilometers, but also culturally, it's very different. There's almost no connection between, like not a language connection. I don't have a Latin language in my background. And yet, I've been here for 7 years, and if you ask me today what I regard as home, it's Romania. When I go to South Africa, once in 2 years for a visit, I feel like I go there as a visitor now, right? And that's quite exciting, and it's quite, it's also strange that can happen, to a person, that your perspective can change and your feeling of belonging can change. Because in the end, we're all a bunch of people together, there are some bridges to build across language and cultures, but it's really an interesting and a very enriching experience to move from one country to another one, because from my perspective, everything is new in the beginning and you experience things for the first time. You're much more open, where you kind of become blind when you're very used to your environment. So yeah, it would probably be one of the decisions that I would look back on my life to think that was one of the most enriching and best decisions I've ever taken, is to come here.
Well, we're very happy you're here.
Thank you.
I'm one of your fans, definitely. So, speaking about your now home country, Romania, how do you look at education in Romania? And I'm now talking about your own personal experience, your mother as well. You're an employer, you're a leader, and you may have faced, opportunities when it comes to meeting people or recruiting people, and also difficulties, perhaps, as we hear with many of the business leaders. So maybe if you can give us your perspective about how you look at education in Romania.
Well, let me start off by, even though I can't speak of personal experience because I didn't come through this education system. I obviously have kids who go to school here. They're not in a public school in Romania. We obviously went there in an English school. But what was quite interesting from the, let's say, the Romanian system and the European way of education is much more focused from that perspective on different aspects, also emotional well-being of kids, which when my kids were in school in South Africa and when I went to school, it was much more of a rigid, disciplined approach, much more all about structure, learn the facts, repeat the facts, shut up, right? Sit in your chair. You must be seen, not be heard, and the rest. If you're good at science and maths, you're okay, right? Everything else didn't matter.
It still sounds very similar to my own experience. Like, especially in the first couple of years, we were supposed to hold our hands behind our back. So
Okay, so very similar.
stand up whenever someone new would come in to say hello and things like that. So very, very similar. I think the accent on emotional well-being and so on. It's been gathering awareness over the past years as we've seen a very deep need for handling that as well.
I think the big focus of the future will have to be to focus better on also individual learning, how individual kids can progress. I mean, we all learn in a different way.
Yeah.
It's not only always about what we used to believe when we grew up. You're not talented in that way, or if you didn't do good at maths, that's not your thing. We still like that. I mean, and there is probably more people have more natural inclinations to certain things, but it's also about how you learn, and if something is presented to you, especially as a kid, in an interesting way, or maybe you don't learn in whatever you see in your mind and what I see in mine, it's a very different experience. So I definitely feel that that was a big shift moving to Romania here. But overall, what is interesting about Romania, if we come back to work, it's a country I find like a lot of women as professionals, right? I mean, that's like a real thing in Romania, which is actually fantastic.
Glad you say that.
I mean, when I started in South Africa in construction, there were no women in construction. Architects, interior designers, sort of like the obvious things. And then I came to Romania, and Prime Kapital is full of engineers that are women. So there's not the obvious sort of choices that women make in Romania. So that for me is very interesting. Coming here,
we're facing a momentum of privilege when some of us have experienced the old. We've seen the world changing, technology taking over, all sorts of businesses and industries developing, and new ideas. It's almost like the future is speeding up, and we're like we're about trying to grab it. So from that perspective, I'd love to know, what is it, because you're running a very interesting business. So what was it in your education? What were the abilities, the skills that you picked up from your upbringing and your education, and that give you the strength of, leading a business, of adapting to such massive change that we've been seeing over the past couple of years? There's no point in talking about pandemics, wars, inflation, and there's a lot more coming, climate change and everything else, regulations and AI and everything else. So would love to know, what were those ingredients that are helping you today that you picked up from your education? And also, if you were to go back again, what would you add
to all of that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the most sort of valuable thing that comes out of the environment that I grew up in, there was always a sense of uncertainty. I remember from growing up, there was always this underlying anxiety and pressure. Change was coming. I knew as a kid, adults were stressed. You knew something was going on, but as a child, you were aware of. It wasn't like a very cocooned environment.
Yeah.
So from that, I think you grow up with a sense that you will have to take responsibility for your own future, right? There's
Yeah.
no certainty
Of the tomorrow. Day
beyond
after.
your
Yeah.
decisions and the things that you take in your life and motion forward. So discomfort in a good dose is always a wonderful thing to grow from.
You read my mind. Yeah, I've been hearing lately a lot of people, use these expressions. Oh, I'm not feeling comfortable with that. I'm not comfortable taking that decision or playing that role or taking that responsibility or running that project. And I'm not sure, that's what we're supposed to be doing, creating more comfort. But, how do we distinguish between what we should give to kids in terms of the proper environment to develop for a future that we have no idea how it is going to look like? What's your view on that?
Well, that's interesting. I'm going to say, just out of my own experience, I think you've got to accept that you're going to go into life with yourself. Yeah. If you psychologically or mentally not in a good space, and if you don't have the mental strength, you are going to be the one who will suffer. It's like no one can save you from anything. So for me, if we can teach kids, and actually anyone, resilience, right, and strength, because no matter where you come from, you will face a certain period in your life where you will have to reach for every resource that you have, emotionally, mentally. You always hear those stories, right? And you need to be able to reach for that fuel, soldier on, and recover. And if we can bring kids up in an environment where they can believe that they will, no matter how, we all have this anxiety where you think, if this happens to me, that will be it. I'll give up. It's actually the wrong thinking. You should be thinking, no matter what, how bad, even the worst things, the things you don't even want to think of in your mind, you will persevere. And you've to be able to have that trust in yourself. Took me a long time to reach a level where I believed in, right? Much into older life. As an old, but I wish I had some of the tools I have today with earlier in my 20s, right?
Can you give us some examples by the tools?
Well, just this kind of mental, ability to not believe everything that you think, right? Not respond to every emotion. To analyze your own thoughts more than anything else, not to have an ego, right? Egos get in the way of a lot of things, not relationships, burning bridges, but your ego often just gets in the way of growing, So, and all of these things are tools that, if you learn early on, will make the path so much greater and so much exciting in a way, because let's face it, like if you don't have an ego and you're wrong, it's actually quite a nice thing, because it means you learned something new, right?
Yeah.
And I read this somewhere the other day. It's not certainly on my own thought, but often we so if your ego is in the way, you're so set on being right, you don't even know why you want to be right. So look, we live in a world where I look at my own kids, they have access to so much knowledge. They're like little robots, like you speak to any kid today and they just go like, they know things about things that I certainly know nothing about. But okay, so you have all this access to all this knowledge, but what are they going to do with it? And they will have to be creative. They will have to have very, very strong analytical skills, just the amount of information that comes their way. Because now we had one perspective, maybe that was your textbook perspective or your parents' perspective. Now you kind of can get everyone's perspective, and you can't shield kids from that, right? You can't tell your child, oh, you can't go on the internet, you can't watch. That's just illogical. So what we have to do is to prepare kids to be able to take all this information and analyze it and draw the best conclusions or the correct conclusions, because otherwise they're gonna end up believing certain things that's like misinformation, or so that's the challenge.
It's a challenge, and I'll share a personal frustration because they're, still in the public education system in Romania. There's still a lot of textbook practice in the sense of, kids are accumulating knowledge and information, and I'm always wondering, what's their decision making looking like. That was one of the things that I was struggling with in the past, memorizing, and doing your homework and everything else. Then what should they look at when it comes to having a vision for their future? And I'm thinking, maybe about your perspective on the role of a teacher might have in this era of information and technology. Let's say if this is an ideal world that we're painting, what would you want to see in front of the kids?
Wow, that's a tough question.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't thought about it so much.
Or perhaps the role of all the adults, supporting
I mean,
the kids.
look, I mean, I think we all, and kids especially, they want to relate to someone. So if you want to have a positive impact on a child, that person should be relatable. And relatable doesn't mean on age or we both play the same game, but there's something you've got to be able to connect to. Education has two different important areas. It's the education, or the formalized education as we think today, and then it's like the nurture behind it, and the background that you come from, the relationships you have. If people can push you forward, if you have the support at home, which is obviously very difficult, as we established already earlier on, if you don't have that. If kids can grow up with that sort of idea, to do away with the idea that I am entitled to something, because nobody's entitled to anything. And if you can grow up with the idea that there are no lucky or unlucky, right? I mean, you will always have somebody way ahead of you and somebody way behind you, somebody who has a lot more than you have and somebody who has a lot less than you have. And that way of looking at life can become very limiting if you more focused on what you don't have or what others have. And we all do it, and we've all done it, right? You can be in like the most amazing environment and then think, oh,
Compare yourself.
never gonna have a house like that. Like the comparison, all comparison. And kids are really confronted today with that sort of thing online, right? So I think it can become very muddled, the waters. When I grew up, if you wanted something, it wasn't so in your face. I had desires for some, like a pair of Nikes, for instance, when I grew up, was like, it was amazing. If somebody had a pair of Nikes or Doc Martens at school, you knew who those people were. If you wanted that same thing, you had to go and work hard somewhere, job for like the week, school holiday, to be able to buy it. And then you would save money and you would look after that pair of shoes like your life depended. But nowadays, like there's all people out there with that pair of Nikes and those pair of things, and kids that's 14 that are, I don't know, billionaires and all kinds of things. So if the people in front of kids today should be able to help kids to navigate the waters differently. And I think the one probable way of it would be it's not so true of the it's not so different from anyone who's ever lived, is to look at your life as something that's not supposed to be easy.
It's very difficult.
And supposed to be comfortable. and
Yeah.
make some kind of contribution, right?
To the world. So let's talk about that contribution. And I'll go back to this idea of community. You're building communities.
And a community has to have a, it can be a building, it can be a block, it can be like a whole town, village, whatever. But if it's within a manageable sort of size and people have something in common, right? A common interest, where people invest, that is something very powerful in terms of also looking after people in those communities. So how I grew up, there no bubbles exist. You grew up with all layers of society, people from all different walks of life, with different challenges. And when you have very strong communities in very, very rural, even very poor areas in South Africa, you have these wonderful examples of communities who doesn't have any financial capability, but those parents and those teachers in the schools will give their extra time on Saturdays. They will, they make plans, and then these schools succeed. You can see it in the results of the school and the academics. And it's that sort of thing that I think, at least where I want to see communities grow back to again, to bring people who has a shared interest, a shared value, closer to do their charity there, right? And I don't know if I even answered any question.
Well, you gave me your understanding of the, of the community and why it's so important. And it just makes so much sense because I realize, I grew up with my neighbor warming up the food for me because my parents were working, that was like that kind of intimacy. And
Yes.
in the community, and people just helped each other. If there was no sugar left then in the house, you would just ring a doorbell and then someone would help you out with a spoonful, and there was the exchange. And especially around Christmas or Easter, visiting each other and sharing food and things like that. And I realized I don't know most of my neighbors. Like, I don't know their names. And I hear that around, especially in Bucharest. It's obviously a different perspective in the smaller villages. But I guess, from, you've built a few communities in your residential projects. What could we take from there and bring it into strengthening the community around the school, you think? Because, we've seen people becoming, some of them stay close, but some of them go further away and looking at their own objectives and their individual objectives, and after the well-being of their own family.
Yeah, it is difficult.
I
I think we are probably in a era where people are we're very self-focused, and we look first at ourselves, and maybe especially when people are very comfortable. I think the way cities will develop moving forward will take on a very different shape. I mean, we're going to urbanize. We're going to urbanize even more, and we're going to have to be very clever about how we develop, right? And I almost think we will have cities within cities, communities within communities. I think we will go back to that footprint because it's more sustainable. It will be more cost efficient. So in a way, the way things have developed as things stand right now was because of it was easy to develop and to do urban sprawl. But now nobody wants to travel an hour anymore, right? So my prediction is we will go back sort of more to that concept that we have of communities, but on in a futuristic type of world. And that would mean, right, if you develop large developments with infrastructure around for schools and education, and communities to bring people from different walks of life with a shared interest together within those communities. And naturally, then I think people will invest back and things will grow from there.
There will be a lot of people, watching us today and coming from various backgrounds, businesses, institutions, parents or not, young adults, or perhaps, some more experienced folks out there. As of this year and as of now, we're just calling everyone to join our mission in terms of helping every kid in Romania to fulfill their potential. And basically, as of now, everyone can come and, use the technology, use Hartaedu or other platforms, grab the community, grab the school that they want to support, maybe a topic that they might want to get involved. And they can do it now.
Yeah.
Speaking of technology, there's a lot of awareness around all sorts of causes, not only education. But when it comes to education, what should we tell them today? What should they care? And why? Why should they get involved? What happens if they don't?
I'm going to jump off topic and then I'll get back to it. I think one of the things that's interesting about Narada for us and for Prime Kapital is you guys reach at grassroots level, right? So it's interesting for me that you go and see exactly what that teacher needs to make a difference for that classroom or for that sports team, right?
Yeah.
Which is those little adjustments that are interesting, right? Because if you take a global perspective,
Yeah.
nothing will change much because it feels overwhelming.
Yeah.
Anything as a global view is like overwhelming. But when you actually start to make small differences where it can have big impact, which we can never truly understand, right? Then that's interesting.
Thank you so much. I think that there's a lot of it that we can learn from, our conversation today. Thank you for making a difference and for being here today.
Pleasure.
And I'm really looking forward to the feedback that people are going to have, watching us today.
Thank you.